Starting any kind of project can be terrifying, even if it's just something like working on a new kind of video. But I've always found that if you find ways to start just little bits at a time, the anxiety might not be so bad. So for my first media analysis kind of video on Unsupervised Nerds, let's take a deep dive into something small. Small Soldiers sits in a weird middle ground between a spoof of war movies and Toy Story as a family horror. This is a movie I loved as a kid. Me and one of my brothers even had a few of the toys, and recently, I decided to watch it again for the first time in years. Right in the beginning, in one of the very first scenes, a line caught my attention in a way that totally changed how I watched the rest of the movie. If you've seen the movie before, you may remember that the Gorgonites are the good guys and work with the humans, while the Commando Elite are the bad guys and try to kill everyone. But here's the thing, when the toy lines are being pitched, the sides aren't called out as Gorgonites good, Commando Elite bad. The Commando Elite are actually made the focus and the Gorgonites the enemy. This moment doesn't affect the plot in any way, and yet here we are with a whole video that was spurred on mostly by this one scene. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with the basics. Small Soldiers was released in 1998. It's directed by Joe Dante and written by Gavin Scott, Adam Rifkin, and writing partners Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio. The movie starts off with an ad for Globotech, a military weapons manufacturer that is trying to diversify itself and has just purchased Heartland Toys, which they have renamed Heartland Play Systems. Globotech is run by a man named Gil Mars, making him a weapons manufacturer named after the Roman god of war. Huh. I wonder if other characters' names have these kinds of hidden meanings. Well, let's see. His assistant is named...
I'm Miss Kegel.
Maybe we move on from names. Anyway, Irwin and Larry are pitching Mars on possible new toy lines. Irwin struggles through a nervous pitch about monsters called Gorgonites, who are lost and have to learn more about our world in order to get back to theirs. These are toys meant to help encourage kids to want to educate themselves about our planet. Larry, on the other hand, has a confident multimedia pitch about a group of military men called the Commando Elite. Mars is instantly sold on Larry's idea, obviously, but these guys are soldiers. What do soldiers need?
Hats?
Camouflage?
Miss Kegel?
Enemies, sir.
And so Gorgonites are changed from being educational toys to enemies in a war. The one caveat here is that Mars wants the toys to be capable of everything they do in the commercials. To make this happen, he tells them to use any of Globotech's resources to find processing chips that can handle it. Larry takes the lead on finding these chips and stumbles his way into some high-tech munitions chips. 3 months later, we meet Alan Abernathy. He's a troubled kid whose dad owns a toy store that specializes in old-fashioned toys that most kids aren't interested in these days.
Look at those toys. Come on, Grandma. This place never has anything good.
When Joe the delivery driver comes around, the two of them open up a couple Commando Elite and Gorgonite toys just out of curiosity. Alan asks to be loaned a complete set because he thinks he could finally make his dad's store some money, and Joe agrees to it. We soon learn that the chips that Larry chose to put in the toys have brought them to life. The Commando Elite make it their goal to eliminate all the Gorgonites, while the Gorgonites often repeat how they are programmed to hide and lose.
Besides, monsters shouldn't be hiding. You should be out fighting commandos.
We would lose. It is what we were programmed to do.
Hide and lose? Those are some great options.
And with that, the pieces are all in place, and Alan finds himself in the middle of a war between two factions of toys. The stakes quickly grow from the toy store being trashed to Christy, Alan's crush, being kidnapped, to a battle around Alan's house that puts both his and Christy's family's lives in danger. In the end, the humans and the Gorgonites work together, with the Gorgonites eventually fighting instead of hiding. The Commando Elite are destroyed, while the Gorgonites sail off in search of their home. This has been a pretty quick summary, but I'm hoping it's enough to show why that early line made me so interested. To look at the events of this movie where the Commando Elite are doing things like shooting nail guns and flamethrowers at seemingly innocent people, and to keep in mind that they're presented as though they are the good guys, it feels like it's trying to say something. To get a better idea of what it might be saying, let's look outside the movie a little bit. Intertextuality and peritextuality both get their origins in literary analysis, but they can be really interesting lenses through which to look at all kinds of media. Intertextuality can be a bit of a pain because it's been used in a few different ways, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be using it in the broadest meaning possible. Intertextuality refers to any way in which a primary text, in this case Small Soldiers, makes reference to any secondary text. This can be quotes, allusions, showing clips of another movie, and so on. I'm not going to refer to peritextuality much, but it will come up enough that it's worth defining as well. Peritextuality is any secondary text which gives new meaning to the primary text. This is stuff like the title, the post poster, the trailer, filmographies of the cast and director, interviews, reviews, and even this video I'm making right now is paratextually connected to Small Soldiers. Basically, they both refer to works outside of the movie, but intertext is created by the movie itself, and paratext comes from outside the movie. Either of these can be used to find more meaning within a work, or they can exist as nothing more than fun facts. It can come down to the person interpreting the text to decide what to put emphasis on. For an example of intertextuality, when Nick Nitro dies, Major Chip Hazard says,
Nick Nitro's battery has run out, but his memory will keep going and going and going.
This references Energizer batteries and their slogan that they keep going and going and going. Does this moment add anything to the movie? Not really. It's a fun joke, it plays on the fact that they're toys, but it doesn't really get any deeper than that. For an example of paratextuality, let's look at the secret password Irwin is assigned.
Mine's Gizmo.
While just saying the word gizmo isn't much of anything on its own, there's more meaning brought to it when we know that Joe Dante directed both this movie and Gremlins. Much like the Energizer Bunny reference, there doesn't really seem to be anything deeper than the base fact of it all, but it may make viewers feel like Captain America in Avengers.
I understood that reference.
With these concepts in mind, let's look at the scene where Major Chip Hazard gives a speech to the rest of the Commando Elite. Chip Hazard is talking in front of an American flag puzzle in a scene that's meant to mimic the opening from Patton. Not only is it set up as a toy equivalent of the same shot, but Chip Hazard uses an identical opening line.
Soldiers, no poor sap ever won a war by dying for his country.
No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country.
Though, after this, the two speeches swerve into fairly different directions. Giving a heavily paraphrased version of General Patton's speech, because it's a 6-minute scene, Patton is talking about how you shouldn't want to join the army to die for your country. No, you should want to join the army because America loves winners. When your grandchildren ask you what you did in the war, you don't want to tell them that you were shoveling shit, you want to tell them you helped win it. Chip Hazard's speech also starts with telling his men that they shouldn't want to join the army to die for their country, but after that he spouts morale-boosting cliche after cliche.
And to the victors go the spoils. So remember, you are the best, of the few, and the proud. So ask not what your country can do for you.
By the end, he's telling them that they should be upset that they can't die for their country more than once.
Only regret that you have but one life to live.
Looking at this moment through the lens of intertextuality, the question is raised as to what further meaning is brought to the scene by alluding to Patton so directly. One option is to read it as just parody. It is a scene that harkens back to an older one to make jokes about it. But given how so much of this movie plays out, there could be another answer. Throughout Small Soldiers, there are comparisons between the actions of the Commando Elite and war. In a scene that I can't show you with volume because it'd probably get hit by copyright claims, the Commando Elite blasts Spice Girls as loud as they can in a move that's called out by the characters as being psychological warfare and compared to something the Marines did against Noriega. This is a reference to a real-world event where the US military was in Panama and used this tactic to get General Manuel Noriega to surrender. The barrage of music lasted for nearly a week and a half from Christmas Day 1989 to January 3rd, 1990. In a scene that pretty much drops any pretense of these being jokes, the Commando Elite attack Christie's little brother. After the attack starts, we cut away to what his parents are watching, the World War II movie To Hell and Back. Here we're seeing a tank moving over a battlefield with explosions and gunfire, and the way this is cut against the toys attacking a small child creates the idea that the two things are equivalent. For a paratextual connection, let's look at the casting of the Commando Elite themselves. 4 of the 6 toys are voiced by actors from The Dirty Dozen. If you don't know, The Dirty Dozen is a war movie in which 12 of the Army's worst prisoners are sent on a suicide mission and told that if they survive, they will be pardoned of all their crimes. This is a very interesting choice to make in casting because it isn't just that they were in a war movie before, but specifically a movie in which they are prisoners who are incentivized to do anything at all it takes to win. With all this in mind, let's go back to the speech that alludes to Patton and why I don't think it's simply parody. The Commando Elite are soldiers, they are representations of the military, and the movie is constantly reminding us of war when they are involved. Sometimes it's a joke, like just playing some Spice Girls, and sometimes it's more serious, like the attack against Christie's brother. In the end, Chip Hazard's speech circles around the idea that a soldier should do anything it takes for their country to win, to the point that they should be willing to give their lives multiple times over. Is it entirely just an exaggerated joke making fun of the Patton speech, or are all the visual similarities in place to say that maybe these two speeches aren't that different after all? Looking at just the Commando Elite and how they are shown to be representations of soldiers, the movie is pretty anti-military. But we've only looked at one side of this war. Let's see what the other half is doing. While the intertextual and paratextual connections we can make around the Commando Elite intrinsically link them with the soldiers in war movies, the Gorgonites are instead linked with monster movies. Let's look at Slamfist for a moment. He's a large hunchback figure, not unlike another character from the movies. But if simply having a hunch isn't enough, there is this scene. Here we're seeing an intertextual connection between Slamfist and Quasimodo. The big thing with Quasimodo is that he lives in fear of how he will be perceived because of his appearance. And then there's Ocula, a toy who is basically an eye with legs. In one scene, Ocula is watching TV with Slamfist, and they end up on a 1958 sci-fi film, The Trollenberg Terror, or The Crawling Eye as it was titled in the States. After seeing the eye-based alien from the movie, Slamfist asks,
Friend of yours?
An interesting thing about the aliens in the Trollenberg Terror is that there's never really a chance to learn anything about them. We know they come from another planet, and we know they need cold temperatures to survive. One character in the movie suggests that their original planet may have been dying, and so they've come to Earth to survive, but we don't really know their motives. And finally, let's talk about Troglodyte, a character who ends up being in the credits as Frankenstein because early in the movie he's destroyed by the Commando Elite and then rebuilt with parts of a radio. It's probably obvious already, but Troglodyte exists as the small soldier's take on Frankenstein's monster. The comparison is explicitly made by Alan when he first sees Troglodyte's new look and says,
Freaky. Like Frankenstein.
but then implicitly made again when we see that Troglodyte is watching the 1931 Frankenstein and sadly remarking,
I feel your pain.
Frankenstein and his monster have an interesting history because depending on the adaptation, how monstrous Frankenstein's monster really is can completely change. Looking specifically at the 1931 movie that Troglodyte is watching, the monster is a more sympathetic figure. He's seen as monstrous because of his appearance and the way he was created, but his more aggressive acts come out of either being tormented or in one case the simple fact that he's newly born and doesn't understand the world or his own strength. If we want to go one layer deeper and bring in the original book by Mary Shelley, that sympathy for the monster still exists to some extent. He knowingly commits multiple murders and uses the threat of more in an attempt to blackmail his creator, but again it arguably stems from his mistreatment. I won't go so far as to call the monster the good guy in that story, but Frankenstein himself isn't good either. So here we have Troglodyte being compared to a classic monster who is often made the villain, even though his creator is equally, or more so, to blame for the bad things that happen around him. We could compare this to the Quasimodo connection and a pattern starts to emerge, and then we bring in the Trollenberg Terror reference, and maybe we start to question how monstrous those aliens were really meant to be. But we have to stick with Frankenstein just a moment longer and rewind a bit from the scene where Troglodyte is watching the movie. Directly juxtaposed to this scene is one in which the Commando Elite are bringing all of Christie's Gwendy dolls to life. The scene plays out like one from Bride of Frankenstein, including the main musical theme from that movie playing in the background. And then there's the iconic line, "It's alive!" from the original Frankenstein. And this is such a meaningful cut here. We are visually connecting the Commando Elite to Dr. Frankenstein only to immediately juxtapose this with the idea that one of the Gorgonites is like Frankenstein's monster. And if you'll remember what I said just a moment ago, there are arguments to be made about how much Frankenstein's monster versus Frankenstein himself is actually to blame. When it comes to paratextual connections with the casting, the Gorgonites got a similar treatment to the Commando Elite, but where you might expect a monster movie connection, the Gorgonites are instead voiced by actors from This Is Spinal Tap. This Is Spinal Tap is a mockumentary following the heavy metal band Spinal Tap while they are on tour. As far as I can tell, there's no real meaningful connection to the Gorgonites themselves, but comparisons could be made to its use of spoof and how the Small Soldiers is at times spoofing war movies. I'll admit this isn't nearly as meaningful to the point I'm making as the Commando Elite cast was, but well, I wanted to toss it in. Let's keep in mind that throughout this entire section, my focus has been on what is brought to Small Soldiers from other media and just touching on the movie itself in order to get to these points. What we have so far is a list of connections that are there to draw lines between the Commando Elite and soldiers, and then between the Gorgonites and monsters. But not just any monsters. Ones that are either sympathetic, or there's at least an argument for the fact that they could be if we got to know more. But this only takes us so far, so let's get back to the actual movie with all this in mind. Up until this point, I barely talked about the humans in this movie, and, well, they're kind of important. While a lot of the conflict in Small Soldiers comes from the toys and the war between them, Alan is the main character, and that might make him worth talking about at least a little bit. Alan Abernathy is a bad kid, but this fact is presented in a really weird way. For the most part, Alan is a kid just trying to help his family, and especially trying to help his father's toy store make money. None of the kids in town really want to shop there, which comes up multiple times.
I wanted to go to Toy World. Life is full of disappointments.
With this in mind, Alan makes a deal to get toys that he believes will sell, even though he knows his father would be against it. This is also probably illegal, and I'd guess that Joe could get both fired and sued for this, but I digress. Regardless of the legality, which is not something the movie really puts any focus on, the moment is presented as Alan trying to help, trying to be good. As the movie goes on, we see that Alan has some issues with his parents. When he's asked anything about the store, he believes this means his mother doesn't trust him.
I'm just asking. You know, it's possible that I make it through an entire day without screwing up.
He kind of just comes off sensitive because at this point, we haven't seen anything to make us think he's a bad kid. We later find out he's been kicked out of 2 schools.
I did some graffiti, flooded the faculty bathroom, stuff like that. My shrink told my parents I was acting out.
I heard you called in a bomb scare on Parents' Day.
Yeah, that's when I got caught.
The last one's especially terrible, but because we don't really see this side of Alan in the movie, it's easy to forget that he did any of this, which might make us question why these facts even matter. But when we look at what side of the toys war he's on, Alan is paired with the Gorgonites, the monsters. While we don't see a lot of Alan's bad side, the movie presents us with a kid who's on the outs because of his reputation.
Then is it crystal meth, tar, smack?
Irene, for
Well, we
God's
need to know if we're gonna help.
I'm not on drugs!
Alan spends most of the movie helping the Gorgonites, but in doing so, he's also proving to Christy that he's more than what his reputation is, and is proving to his parents that he'll take so much responsibility for his actions that he'll put himself at risk to take out the Commando Elite. While it isn't the exact same arc, we could see similar ideas with a lot of the human characters. Christy might on first glance seem like the typical girl next door, only to reveal herself as being into Led Zeppelin and the X-Files and...
You know, you're not like other girls.
I know.
Okay, it's not a great moment, but this is one of the times we need to remember this movie was made in the 90s. When we get to the point that Christy's held hostage and made to seem like a damsel in distress, well, it doesn't quite play out that way. Ellen comes to save her, but ends up being attacked by the Gwendy dolls himself. Archer unties one of her hands, but then hides, as the Gorgonites tend to do. It's Christy who picks up a weapon and starts annihilating the toys. Christy then drives their getaway moped, and at the end of the climax, Christy saves Ellen by running over the Commando Elite with a lawnmower. For a similar example, there's Christy's boyfriend Brad. He's this tough, cool, older guy. He wears a cool jacket and rides a motorcycle and has that sweet 90s hair that I'm totally not jealous of. And he's the first to try to save Christy when she's being kidnapped. While he has the appearance of the guy who will save the day, he's scared off by the toys. He ends up running from the house, leaving his pants behind. Presumably, he doesn't even tell anyone about what happened to Christy because no one ever comes to help. While Alan's dad is a little extra angry and stressed, his parents generally come off like the more peaceful type, and yet it's them who kick butt in the climax, while Christy's war movie loving parents just hide. After all this, we're really getting somewhere. We have soldiers coming off pretty bad, we have monsters who just want peace, and humans who aren't exactly who they appear to be. So thematically, we're looking at ideas like, not everyone is who they seem, you can't judge a book by its cover, and these kinds of things are decent themes for kids' movies. But there's still something bugging me. Where one line from the beginning got me started on all this, one line towards the end really got me invested. When the Abernathys and the Fimples are all together right before the final fight, Christy's dad is convinced that Alan has made the whole thing up and has brainwashed his daughter. Because of this, we get this exchange.
Don't worry, honey. We'll get you the best deprogrammer money can buy.
You can't change programming.
The two are talking about very different things, with Phil talking about something incredibly screwed up to do with the human mind, while Slimfist is talking about real programming because, of course, his mind is run by software. We see this idea of programming talked about a few times throughout the movie in respect to the toys. This often comes with Archer explaining how the Gorgonites hide and lose, or less directly, anytime the Commando Elite talk about killing the Gorgonites. And that's it for most of the movie. The toys have this very short list of things that they're programmed to do, but then something happens. During the final battle, Archer gives a speech to rally all the Gorgonites into coming out of hiding.
If we hide, we will still lose. No more hiding.
Not only does this talk them into joining the fight for the first time, but they're actually kicking ass. That is, until we get to the big confrontation between Archer and Chip Hazard. The two toys once again bring up their programming and how Archer is programmed to lose. And he does lose, right? He gets Sparta kicked right off the pole, and that feels like a pretty big loss. Narratively speaking, this kind of had to happen because Alan is the main character. He needs to be the one to finish this fight. But the reason he succeeds is because of Archer's help. Archer distracts Chip Hazard long enough for Alan to get his footing back and even mention how the toys are made of metal, a little tidbit that leads to Chip Hazard's shocking end. So, can we say that Archer helped win, in a sense? And if so, especially with everything else that happened, is Slamfist wrong about not being able to change programming? Weirdly, not at all, because of one little fact that they hide pretty well until this point. Archer says one more thing during this fight.
I'm also programmed to learn.
The Gorgonites never talk about it, but they're programmed to do more than hide and lose. They're programmed to learn. Remember how they were originally pitched?
Okay, well, these are monsters who come from the land of Gorgon, and they've come to our world, and they're lost. And now, in order to get back to Gorgon, they have to find out as much stuff about our world as possible. And this way, the kids can learn and do research.
This is an idea that's been built into the entire movie to a shocking degree without ever really calling attention to it before now. The first action we see Archer do when he's alone is search through an online encyclopedia. Archer is able to rewrite Alan's name in his memory after thinking it's Alan now shut up. The Gorgonites are curious about the world outside Alan's window, asking again and again what is beyond each thing Alan names.
And beyond that?
And beyond that?
And beyond that?
And what's beyond that?
A fact that comes back later when Archer brings Alan back to the window to remind him of the power pole that will come to play in the climax. And then Archer's curious about wind. Alan gives the worst explanation ever, but it's so interesting that they toss this scene in here where Archer's just asking about this stuff.
It's kind of hard to describe. Weather patterns, wind chill factor.
Contrasting this, there's only one time the Commando Elite are ever seen changing their worldview in even the smallest of ways. And that's when they change their definition of Gorgonites from just meaning toys to including the humans around the toys.
Recon estimates Gorgonites gun strength at 16!
16? Where'd they get 16 from?
7 Gorgonites and 9 people.
The chips are explained as being like real intelligence, only they're bound by their software. The Commando Elite are programmed to be single-minded in their mission to kill the Gorgonites, and therefore all the learning they can do must fall within that directive. Because the Gorgonites are built not just to learn, but to be curious, they could go so much further beyond their programming. They can change, they can decide not to hide, they can fight, and they can win. Small Soldiers is a movie I loved as a kid, and even as an adult, I gotta say, it has a surprising amount going on. It's aimed at kids, and yet spends so much time referencing things from long before that audience was ever born. It has a setup of good guys versus bad guys, but it uses this simple dichotomy to explore ideas of the monstrous and the military. And most interestingly, to me at least, it feels like it falls into this comfortable place of just saying you can't judge a book by its cover, only taking that one step further. Small Soldiers appears on the surface to just be anti-military, but I don't think that's all there is to it, although that reading is totally there. I think the idea of using caricatures of the military and the monsters as the bad guys and the good guys isn't just to shit on one and praise the other, but instead to question ideas that go unchallenged. It tells the audience that the good guys learn, the good guys grow, and it's because of how they're able to change their thinking when new information is presented to them that not only makes them the good guys, but allows them to survive the war. And if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. That is the very first media analysis kind of deep dive video on the Unsupervised Nerds channel. If you're into this kind of media analysis, there is more of it in written form on unsupervisednerds.com. But hey, let us know what you think. Leave a comment to let me know you got this far and what you think. Am I completely off base with all of this? Am I just being insane? Or do you agree with some of the points I'm making? And with that, goodbye, everybody.